don't know me, I am the director for the Historic Preservation Commission, which is an arm of city government. It's a commission made up of 14 volunteers who serve voluntarily and with no compensation except for the love that they have for old houses, old buildings and such. And the vice chairman is here today. I'd like to introduce, here she is, okay, Abby Friedman. There may be some other commission members also here today coming along as well. So the commission actually reviews properties or owners that want to do work on their houses when they're designated historic by the city of Somerville. We have over 350 properties in the city that are designated locally as significant. We also have a number of national register properties. But it's the local ones that the commission actually reviews when they make alterations to the exterior, when they're visible from the public way, and there's significant changes. So, the tour today is going to be led by Ed Gordon. For those of you that have been on the tour, you all know him well. We keep having him come back because he does such a great job. Ed is actually president of the Victorian Society of New England, of America in New England, yep. And he will speak momentarily. Ed has actually done a lot of surveying for us in the city of Somerville over the years, and so he is not only knowledgeable about Union Square, but many other parts of Somerville as well that we've surveyed. He also has done surveying throughout the Boston metropolitan area, leads tours for all kinds of different groups for, I want to say decades, but then I want to get too old. So he's very knowledgeable about how Somerville fits into the larger context and adds another whole dimension to the tour. And so he will be leading the tour most of the time. Christy Chase is the person that's been checking a lot of you in, who is here somewhere. Christy. Christy actually is a preservation planner, works alongside me for the commission as a staff member. She's actually the person that works mostly with the property owners that are making alterations to their properties and trying to help them figure out how to do it and to do it in a way that's sensitive to their historic architecture.
Welcome to the annual Union Square tour. Our route today will take us from Central Hill here down to the Somerville Avenue transportation, industrial, commercial corridor, and that's really our focus. But we're starting up here just to say a bit about this campus, this oldest park in the city. This is Central Hill Park, which was begun in 1870 thanks to Jacob Sleeper, who basically put this parcel together. The then town purchased it, and then it became the site of actually 2 generations of municipal buildings. And we should just, backing up into the 18th century, say that up here on Central Hill, this was called the church lots because the Congregational Church in Charlestown owned this as upland pasture, and so it remained in church hands right up until the middle of the 19th century. Should just point out that we're starting in front of Somerville High School. The oldest part is this central component, which was built in 1896 from designs provided by Hartwell and Richardson, and they were a very prominent firm. And this Hartwell and Richardson, this isn't H.H. Richardson of Trinity Church and Copley Square fame. This is another Richardson. And they are perhaps best known for designing the Cambridge City Hall on Mass Ave in the Central Square area, and also the Exeter Street Theater in the Back Bay, which is 1886. What's going on with the center part of the high school is it's a mix of the Renaissance revival as seen in the arches with the console keystones in the center, and there's some references to the classical revival in the pilasters on either side of the main entrance. But what's missing from this picture is the massive original roof, which burned off in the, I think around 1960. It's in your handout. And then on either side there are flanking wings from the late 1920s that on the left, the west wing stands on the site of the 1884 library building, a Richardsonian Romanesque library building, which was taken down in 1928 to make way for the west wing. And then looking over to my right at Somerville City Hall, this starts its life in 1852 as a Greek Revival school building, and then in 1866 the city moves from a building on Forster Street, and it sets up the town business in this building. The town becomes a city in 1872, and then in 1896 there's another addition, and in 1924 the addition that has the Alderman's Chamber, the north wing, that's 1924. So a building that at least retains its original early 1850s nucleus. And then, of course, further to the east we have the library that we started the tour last spring from, and that's 1914. So this is a park, a campus for municipal buildings, and actually quite a treasure for the city to have.
The interior of each of those buildings, by the way, has been renovated since those times as well.
Okay, good to know. And also some of the best views of northern Somerville can be had from this opening down here between the high school and the town city hall, looking out over northern Somerville to the Mystic River.
The steeple is not part of the original building?
Well, no, the steeple was added later. Monumental Ionic columns at the main entrance are a product of 1896. So, there's been some reworking there. Okay, I think this is a good vantage point to see the George A. Loring house at 76 Highland Avenue. This is one of the great late Victorian residential designs in the city.
Which one?
We're talking about the one right up here,
That one.
the one that looks somewhat medieval with the diamond-shaped window panes. This was designed by an architect named George A. Loring, who is introduced to Somerville when he designs the Romanesque Revival Public Library, which no longer stands, but he came to Somerville in the mid-1880s and then liked it and built this house for himself in 1895, and it shows this interest in a kind of a medieval English look, elements of the shingle style. Prior to 1880, the wooden shingle was considered suitable for sheathing only sheds and outhouses and roofs, and not for entire buildings. But in the 1880s and 90s, you have high-style, expensive houses being completely sheathed with wood shingles, and I will grant you it's a phenomenon that starts out in seaside communities, but it makes its way inland, and it starts out in places like Newport and Bar Harbor, Maine, and Marion, Massachusetts, which I call the quiet Newport.
I'm sorry, you called it what?
The quiet Newport, Marion, has great shingle-style houses. And so this Loring, who at the time was in a firm called Loring and Phipps, they designed over 100 houses that still stand on Prospect Hill and Winter Hill in Somerville. And they went further afield than that, but this is one of their greatest hits, if you will, and Loring was definitely a star architect for Somerville at that time. And just a reminder that the very first big name architect to work in Somerville was none other than Charles Bulfinch, who designed the Barrel Mansion that later became the McLean's Insane Asylum, which is where, you know, what we call Cobble Hill, and where there's an industrial park. There was a Bulfinch building over there, and then fast forwarding to the 1870s and 80s, you start to get many more architects at work in Somerville. Yep.
The chimneys there are
Have
peculiar.
They have great chimney pots, terracotta chimney pots, very English. If you walk around the back bay, you'll see the chimney pots there as well. So very.
Yeah. Another comment is that the mansard next door actually is the first George Loring house when he first came to Somerville. So you can really see how his architecture has changed over time to reflect changing tastes.
Yep, good. Okay. Okay, well, the three houses here, 59, 61, and 63 Putnam Street, were built in the late 1860s, right after the Civil War. This is Somerville kind of getting back to normal life after the war, and building center gable houses. And this center gable Italianate building type is very popular here in the city. You can find them in virtually every neighborhood. Basically, center entrance with an oriel window sitting up top on a roof, porch roof. And in the back, there were stables. I think there are at least one left, if I remember correctly. And the early owners were, let's see, one was a pension agent. They were basically middle-class folks that wanted to come to a street that had been laid out earlier in the 1860s, Putnam Street, which was named for General Israel Putnam of southwestern Connecticut, who commanded the troops up on Prospect Hill and was an important figure in the early days of the Revolution in the Boston area. So we're on Putnam Street. And it would be fun, I think, if we could go and just look at the stable, if that's okay.
Oh, I'm telling the story of it being hit by lightning 2 years ago. Well, I was on vacation in Belize. I call it my long weekend in Belize. And I got a call from my brother, who's younger than me, who I figure is always teasing me. And right, and so he lives in New Hampshire, and he said, well, I'm just going to come right out and tell you. Tell me what? Well, I'm going down to your house now because it's been hit by lightning and it's on fire. So I had 3 pina coladas.
So how much did you care at that point?
Oh, after that I started just looking online at interior design books and stuff, you know. Yeah, it was completely gutted because of the water damage. So it was taken down to the studs. There was nothing in it at all, just the frame and the exterior. But it did give me a chance to add the cupola, which it should have had in the beginning. So that's new. And the old barn that was there had a cupola for ventilation. So it gave me the chance to add that feature.
And you converted this originally when?
I converted it in, I'm trying to remember, was it 89? It was 89 to 92. I started it in 89. I figured I'd do it in a year and move in. And I moved in 92 because I ended up doing it week to week with my paychecks at the end. So pretty much the one that was there, it's pretty much a replica of it. Everything's in the same place.
Okay, I thought we'd regroup in front of the David Lord Apartments. He was the director of the Somerville National Bank back in the late 1800s. this 1890 apartment building was part of his real estate portfolio. He lived at 18 Aldersey Street, and his neighbor was Quincy Adams Vinyl, who was the president of the bank that he was a director at. And the Vinyls were a huge real estate family that developed much of Prospect Hill, Vinyl Avenue, i.e. Speaking to their role. And so this is a good example of a courtyard apartment, which Douglas Shantucci writes about in a very interesting book called Built in Boston, City and Suburb. And he tends to focus on building types like three-deckers and theaters and apartments. And you can see really fabulous examples of the courtyard apartment in places like Cambridge and Brookline. And I can think of, if you know Mid-Cambridge, if you know the castle at Dana and Center Street that I overlooked for 18 years in an apartment across the street, that's maybe the ultimate example of a courtyard apartment. But it's just a way to get more light into the center and have a little bit more in the way of landscaping. And it's a very civilized, attractive kind of approach to apartment design. And then next door, there was a long-lost church. I believe it's called the Second Advent Church. I looked in vain for photographs of this wooden church, but it was built in the late 1880s and then disappeared at some point, and now it's part of the park over next door here. Okay, we're about to walk down Quincy Street, excuse me, which was named for Quincy Adams Vinyl of Aldersey Street, and he and his brother Robert were major real estate developers. Their father started a hay and grain business in what is now Revere, then called North Chelsea, and they were quite well-to-do, and they set this street out in the late 1860s. And looking across the street at number 46, maybe some of you recall when this wasn't in such great shape, and now it looks wonderful, and it deserves to look wonderful because it is a fabulous example of sort of a mini Italianate villa, complete with all the brackets and the little kind of towered mansard part above the doorway, side lights that are a holdover from earlier styles like the Greek Revival and the Federal. And all the slates seem to be up there. So, okay, we're looking at the Quincy Street open space, this wonderful pocket park, really wonderful in my opinion. This is like a small piece of the High Line in New York or something. This was created on the site of a building, a house that had burned in 1989. And so now we have this very creative landscaping and just a really special thing for the neighborhood to have. And while you're looking at that, also try to look across the street at 15 Quincy Street, which was built in the 1890s as a 6-family three-decker. For a man named Antonio Sears, whose occupation is listed as tailor. So he must have been a real high-end tailor down in the financial district, what would have been called a commercial tailor back then. His tenants were tradesmen and workers and salesmen. But what you have here is this really bold form with these bowed bays that project out on either side of the center entrance, and these really bold ionic columns. And it really shows you how the colonial revival style kind of exaggerates the dimensions of the original colonial style of the 18th century. That this is the 19th century getting very grand and blowing things up and celebrating things like the Palladian window in a major way, which illuminates presumably a stairway behind there. And then if you look up at the cornice, there's this wonderful swag detail with bellflowers and ribbons, and then the dental course that looks like piano keys under the eaves, under the cornice. Just a really handsome building that I think is probably the best example of this type in the city. We're now in the Somerville Avenue transportation industry commercial corridor, and really the beginnings of this story go back to the mid-1830s when the Fitchburg Railroad came through here just a little bit to the south of us, and that of course encouraged the transportation of freight and goods, and it became a natural thing for industries to want to set up along its length. You also, and we forget this because we no longer have it, sort of an arm of the Millers River used to run a little bit to the south of us. And so the industries could, unfortunately put their waste materials in that no longer extant river. The Millers River was filled in during the late 19th and early 20th century. It used to be used to serve as a clear dividing line between Cambridge and Somerville, and it was filled in to accommodate railroad yards and more industry. And then of course Somerville Avenue here also encouraged industry and was here for much longer than the railroad. This was part of the old Milk Row, the system of roads that came in from Middlesex County, allowed the farmers from out there to bring their produce to markets in Charlestown and Boston, and they came along Somerville Ave here as part of that Milk Run route. And it was called Milk Run because there used to be many dairy farms in Somerville, up in the hills, up on Spring Hill particularly. There were dairy farms, and the products were then sent into Charlestown and Boston for resale, to be sold. Along with the freight train, then in 1842, passenger service was introduced on the Fitchburg, which meant that then the south slopes of Prospect Hill, Spring Hill, could be developed for well-to-do commuters who wanted to live near the stations. And so then it's really the railroad that's driving Somerville independence. That's just the conclusion that I've come to, that without the railroad, Somerville would have remained for a few more decades as part of Charlestown, the mother town. And but the railroad ramps things up. The early industry here was the Middlesex Dye House and Bleachery, which was further down Somerville Ave, where there's a playground opposite where Central comes in to Somerville Ave. And it's incorrectly my fault. I think I'm calling it the Milk Run Bleachery. It's the Middlesex. And so that was started around 1820. And as early as 1822, it's advertising that it's using steam power. That's really early to be using steam power to make your machinery work. And so that's, we're calling this partially an innovation tour right there. They're using steam power early on here along this corridor. And the Middlesex Dye and Bleachery will be in business until as late as 1936. And so, it was called the oldest running textile finishing mill when it finally called it quits during the Depression. But at this point, I'm going to turn the mic over to Brandon, who has something to say about the cemetery.
Okay, Okay, this is a cemetery here that if you blink coming down Somerville Ave, you might miss. What we've been trying to do in recent years is actually draw more attention to it and actually repair and restore many of its interior finds. It's quite a treasure. I'm not going to belabor and tell you all about them because I'd like to encourage you to go on one of the tours that we do of the Milk Row Cemetery specifically. There's a sign right over here that I know some people are looking at. We started a docent program with the benefit of Historic Somerville organization, and so once a month during the seasonal months, May through hopefully November, we open up the cemetery generally once on a Sunday and then once during the week as well to accommodate different people's schedules. And then we have volunteers that come dressed in what would be historical period clothing to tell you about the cemetery, and we have a brochure as well. So the next one actually in September is the very last day, September 30th. It'll be from 6 to 7:30, when it probably will be dark. And so I encourage you to come to that. We're also doing something called the Ghosts of Somerville every year for the last 5 years, I guess, which is particularly fun because we open up the cemetery the same day that the city has its Monster Mass Festival. For those of you who haven't heard, that's our October festival. Every month the city has a festival from June through October. The Monster Mash is taking off from Halloween, and that's the weekend of October 16th, I think, the weekend after Columbus Day. So the whole Somerville Avenue is closed between Porter Square and Union Square, and there's a whole lot of activities occurring for kids, adults, including this Ghost of Somerville, which will be between 12 and 4. And the fun thing about it in recent years is we've had the local history club of the Somerville High School actually coming and being part of it, and they dress up in historical attire and they lead you around and tell you what they know about the people that are residing here permanently. We can go back to them and ask for some other improvements. Additional landscaping we want to do, returning it to some of the way that it should have looked before. When you pass by, you can see an old picture of the cemetery here on the fence on the gate. Which shows you what it at one point looked like, and it won't look exactly like that, but that's what we're aiming for. So, again, if anybody's interested in ever being a friend of the cemetery or helping us being a docent, by all means, let me know. We'd love it.
Okay, and it used to be that the tube works bordered the cemetery on 3 sides, and there used to be a few more tube work buildings where the Market Basket parking lot is today. But this was a company that was started in 1852, and it got the rights to copy sort of an English counterpart that was called Green's Patent Brass Tubes over in England, and they were fortunate in the beginning to have a very talented machinist at their helm, Freeborn Adams of South Boston. And so what they were doing here was they were making seamless brass and copper tubes for steamships, for locomotives, for industry, and they were very, very successful. And by 1865, they employed 175 men. By 1875, they had made $1.2 million worth of brass and copper tubing. They were second only to the Union Glass Company further east in Union Square in terms of the number of employees and what they were making per year. So this was a major, major company for Somerville to have. The plant went through a major change in the early 20th century. A number of the original buildings were taken down, and a new generation that we still have was put in place, buildings dating from the period of 1900 to the early 1920s. And looking straight ahead is the old pattern shop and blacksmith building, which is the oldest in this group, dating to 1896. And then over on the right, we'll be walking by the administration building, which dates to the early 19-teens, I think 1914. And the administration building has a little bit of architectural ornament above the front door, but this is primarily utilitarian industrial architecture whose design interest just stems from the form and the creative use of brickwork in some cases, and we'll be walking through this. And we're about to walk down what's now, I think, considered to be an alley, but was once Frost Avenue. And then there's another lost street in there that's an alley called Sherman Street that actually had housing along it at one point. So we're going to walk into American Tube. With the Pattern and Black Shop building on the right that's numbered 440, this is an 1896 building, but they're still presenting this in kind of an old-fashioned way with the rock-faced granite lintels that you would have seen on industrial buildings earlier in the 19th century. And if you look up at the gable, you can see these kind of modified oculus or circular windows, and the arched window at the center, which sort of harkens back to the Italianate, and then you see the tie rod ornaments, the stars that you see that nicely finish off iron rods that extend inside from one facade all the way down to the other to help the building to stand up. And all of these buildings have different small businesses. I believe an Indian grocery is down at the end on the right, and they're all, I think, pretty much still being used. The Mystic River, both sides, all the way into Medford, major brick-making going back to the 1640s. Medford having a reputation as being a major brick town, as was Somerville. And the brick-making thing, the heyday in Somerville was like the 1820s to around 1880. And then what happens is that the land that the brickyards occupy is becoming more valuable for the purposes of house building. So, and in East Somerville in particular, you get the development of all those two families in the early 20th century, the College Avenue section of East Somerville, and of course the Middlesex Canal, 1792 to 1803 is when it's built, and that's a major way of transporting bricks into Boston from communities along the Mystic and the canal. So, so brickmaking had its day here in Somerville, definitely. Any other? And the American Tube Work buildings, a lot of the buildings were called drawing mills and rolling mills. And I'm assuming that the rolling mills were where the copper and the brass was somehow rolled out in preparation to turn it into tubing. I tried looking up what drawing meant on Google, and I don't know. I mean, I didn't find an answer, but a lot of the buildings were called drawing mills and rolling mills. And then some of them had a specific use, like the boiler house that we'll see shortly. And I should also point out that the Sanborn insurance atlases that come in the late 19th century, and they're particularly good in the 1920s, that's a great way to go back and look at what was going on with these industries, what these buildings were used for. And the Sanborn insurance atlases were, of course, made for the purposes of insurance companies to try to decide should they insure that industrial complex. So there are reassuring things that there would be notations on the maps, on the buildings, that would say things like night watchman present. So that tells you there's a 24-hour presence. It would say things like sprinkler system installed in whatever year. It would clearly show what portions of the factory were brick, what were made out of wood, what were made out of stone, all color-coded. They're really remarkable. And in some cases, the maps were updated by simply, like, literally cutting and pasting and putting, something over an earlier footprint. So it gets a little wild at times to try to decipher them. But But the Sanborn insurance atlases they're a very good resource now. We're on Tyler Street, which was set out by 1852, and it was named after Columbus Tyler, who was for many years the superintendent of the McLean Insane Asylum, and his house was on the south slope of Spring Hill, where the Greek Orthodox Church is today. The church stands on the old Columbus Tyler estate, which I believe the house lasted until the 1930s or so. And then right in front of us now is Tower Court, which was named for Levi Tower, whose business is listed as stationer in downtown Boston. And this was set out in 1873. And in the late 19th century, the families that lived along Tower Court were primarily Irish, English, and French. And I think this just points out that all along Somerville Avenue, there are a lot of interesting little cul-de-sacs, and the Irish tended to settle along these cul-de-sacs, particularly near the Bleachery, where the Bleachery was located. And so that's really interesting. And of course, across the street is the former Ames Envelope Complex. And I don't think it was mentioned that the Ames Company got its name from the Ames building in downtown Boston, which is now the Ames Hotel. It's now a boutique hotel. But the Ames building was built in 1892, and because one of the Fitzgeralds who founded Ames Envelope, actually I believe it was the founder, John Fitzgerald, actually worked on the construction crew for the Ames building. And so they decided to name Ames Envelope after that building and his long ago experience working as a construction worker. And the Ames building, I'm sure you all know it, it's kind of diagonally across from the old State House. It's where State Street meets Court. As you're heading up towards Tremont, it's on the right. And it's really the first really tall building in Boston, 1892. It's not a skyscraper per se because it doesn't have a steel frame skeleton, but it was built, the corners are remarkably well built out. They're very thick to support the weight of 17 or 18 stories. And then in 1894, the Winthrop Building, the first true skyscraper, came in on Washington Street. Not very tall. I don't want to get into that, but just to point out that that's where the Ames name is coming from. Also the fact that it was up there at the top of the alphabet, that the family liked the idea that it was up that way. And so that's where the Ames name is coming from, and the company was founded because John Fitzgerald decided that he could build a better envelope. And he and his aunts, two lady family members, sat down one evening, and many evenings later they came up with an envelope that would really hold up. And so their first big client was Mass General Hospital. They had to create 500,000 envelopes, and so that's sent them on their way. And the company was founded in 1919, and then it was in business until very recent, like the early 2010, very recent. Digitization.
So that family that company has nothing to do with the Oliver Ames family down in Easton?
No, and that was another piece of this story, that there would also be that, I mean, it's not really written, but I think there was this thought that it would be, people would think, oh, that's the Ames, the Governor Ames's, the Ames plow, the Ames shovel, all of that. So there was a little bit of that too.
Yeah, and you'll see, and also in the brochure, that's what he's saying, the Brahmin Association was very important there. And that's another piece to remark about. The theme of this whole tour is about immigration as well. And so they were Irish, and the Fitzgeralds, and at that time, the Irish need not apply was very much in force. And so they were very sensitive to that, and Ames did not have that ring to it. So that was
Fitzgerald didn't have the ring to it.
Fitzgerald did, but Ames was okay. And the other thing that is that we should mention is that the Ames, the Fitzgerald person who worked in the post office, and so he was very familiar with how bad the envelopes were that were coming through the postal office were falling apart, including when they had bonds in them and they were actually unmarked and very significant and valuable, and so they were opening up, and so he said, oh wait, we can remedy this, and that was sort of the origins of this envelopes that was much safer to come through the mail and such, and so Ames envelope. These are the buildings that they created. This is a street that they created as well in order to accommodate all of these buildings. Interestingly, are connected underneath because they did 24/7. They're workers, and so the other thing about this factory that's very interesting is that they have windows in the factory, which was something in those times obviously wasn't very prevalent, but that made it a much more pleasant working environment for their workers. So, and yet another example of Ames Envelope's employees' benefits.
Well, we're looking at St. Anthony of Padua Roman Catholic Church, which was completed in 1925. And if you recall the flyer for this walk, there was really a remarkable photograph that has not seen a lot of circulation, I don't think, that depicts the mansard row that used to be along Somerville Ave here up at the corner, and then you can just see the facade of this church, and the photograph makes it look like a little chapel. And when I first saw the photograph, I'm thinking, where is there a little chapel like that near Union Square? And then I realized that it was this church, which is really a major landmark within the story of Italians in Somerville. The first Italian immigrants came to the city around 1900, and they tended to settle along Somerville Avenue, the southern slopes of Spring Hill. And in the beginning, in order to worship at an Italian service, many of them walked to save the bus fare. They walked to the north end to St. Leonard's on Hanover Street. And that church is the first Italian Catholic church in New England, which was completed in 1874. It has the Peace Garden in front of it on Hanover Street. And so, and then, fast forwarding into the early 19-teens, the congregation worshiped here in Somerville in a couple of storefronts along Somerville Avenue. And the man who figured so prominently in the beginnings of the church and for decades afterwards, Father Frank Properzi. We are on Properzi Way, which used to be Vine Street and still is on the other side, named for him, and he was the priest here until as late as the early 1960s. But in the 19-teens, he's conducting services for the newly arrived Italian immigrants. Over time, the Italians set up small mom and pop stores, grocery stores, barber shops. There were a whole group of them that worked at MIT cleaning laboratory equipment, glassware, that kind of thing. And and the other piece of this is that Father Properzi was like a one-man contractor with this church. He could do the carpentry, he could do the plumbing, he could do the electrical. He hired a couple of artistic Italian brothers, the Cipolinis, who did some of the low-relief sculpture and some of the interior design, and Father Properzi's input in the interior was also very strong as well.
Welcome. I would like to show you the church, and then you can see. Yeah. I think now we are trying to also give us some improvement now because the centennial is coming. We need to do something different in the church.
Next year.
Right. Yeah. We are thinking to plan, change the lights, maybe the painting, everything, something like that. Yeah. But welcome to do over there. I have to turn on the light, everything.
Okay.
All right.
Great. Thank you.
It's the 100th anniversary next year for the church, so it's very
For the
exciting.
beginning
For
of
the beginning
building.
for the church, and so they're going to have a big celebration, and so he's getting prepared for that. The congregation has changed a lot over time, but it's a very much a thriving church.
Much about Somerville. I've been in the United States for 20 years, but in different places in Europe. My date of this anniversary of the church. I saw the first matter they said over here, the celebration, they invited the choirs from Sacred Heart, all the peoples around. And the rain came, and they say that it was all full of water over here, and the priest said, yes, everything. And then after that, I think, a few years later, they bought the next piece of land over here, was some buildings. And at 26 about, they start to build the upper church. That was. And I know that they went on doing things all the time, and they were all involved in that Italian community because Father Poperzi in the 47, he rebuilt this church, this way, all the windows, the upstairs, they put all the glasses in the window. And after that, they bought the land over here for the school. In the 57, they broke the ground for the school. And I think in the 60s, they built also the school over there. And I think that was the history, almost a little summary of the church history. And we know that after that, they built the school, everything went okay. And I think in the 70s, the 80s, already the Italian, they start to move out, the children. And remain only the parents around and the old community. In the 80s, about the 80s, I think the Brazilians, they started in Somerville. And today the church is 90-95% Brazilian. We have a small Italian community over here. And the people who remain around, but it's present. We have every day English Mass, 7:30 for almost the retired people around. They come. And Saturday and Sunday we have also a service in English for this small Italian, Italo-American, they can call them, Italian-American community. Most of them, they were born over here, all of them now. And we have this service. And I think now we try to celebrate this. You can see all those saints, they are Italian saints, devotion, everything. And I put two Brazilian ones, the patrons of Brazil, Our Lady of Aparecida, and another devotion, the Lady of the Undoer Nuts. The Pope brought that devotion to South America, Pope Francisco, to Argentina, from Argentina to Brazil, but it's all over the world. I've never heard about that. It's a very popular devotion now. And I put also, have these candles have been a lot of it. The Italian, they like to light candles, everything. The Brazilian also, not as much as the Italian, but close enough. And that is because we have this little shrine around. When I came over here the first time, I saw this church downstairs over here, and I said, this looks like a catacomb. Have you been wrong? Looks like the catacombs. But it's beautiful. And now we try to put some light over a different light, that the place become a little better. Never light that. The time that this church is what we use the most, weekdays, and Sunday for the Italians. We have two services for the Brazilian and the Irish church because we cannot stay the whole community over here. And then we use the other church too. Have any questions on it? During the day, we need to lock the church. I know what happened before I came with the other former pastor, and I think they tried to break in, they stole something. It's difficult to leave things open when it's not secure. That is, otherwise it would be very nice to have the church all the time open. I know many people around they would like to come. Maybe now that they are developing all that area around, Portuguese who work in the bank, they like to come. But we need to keep close because maybe we can find another way to put some cameras and then maybe we can help.
I want to share with you this. Those of you that saw the flyer to get to this tour, I don't know, different ways, but did anybody guess where this photo was taken? That was on the flyer? You did guess? Where? Where was this photo taken? Well, the interesting thing is, this is a photograph that I got from the father. Very nicely shared when I came to talk to him about this tour. It's on the wall. It's been discovered when he came here. And it is a photograph, I'll not tell you the answers to the quiz, that is of St. Anthony's Church. And if you look, again, if you go back to the flyer, on the far right-hand side here, you'll actually see St. Anthony's Church in the foreground, the background, I should say. And this here, which is what stumped everybody, most people that I talked to that tried to make an educated guess thought it might be St. Joseph's Church or another one in this area. And of course, because I could see the church over here. But what puzzled them, of course, was this was here. And this was all housing that is now been replaced by a parking lot out front. So he has nothing to do with that, so we don't blame him. But this is an example of one of the reasons why we like to do these tours and why we like you to come and see, to appreciate, what the city has to offer. Because at one point in time, a lot of the older buildings were being knocked down and new buildings being put up, or parking lots. And I'm sure you know there's a song about that. And so this was housing that's totally gone, could have been restored, and this is exactly what I was telling you before about how we're going to have neighborhood meetings coming up for a neighborhood plan for Union Square that the director of the planning, George Parakis, wants to encourage all of you to come to, which will be starting in November of this year. There'll be one in November, one in January, and then through the winter, and there'll be a plan that's coming out next late spring, early summer for Union Square. And in order for that to be more than just an exercise, the planners very much, myself included, want you to come to those meetings and participate and give your input into it. And if you have reasons to think that you'd like to see some of the old buildings, as someone was saying earlier today, preserved in the city and restored and rehabbed and converted to new uses, as we've seen in many cases today, then I urge you to come to those meetings and say so.
This may be the oldest house along the Somerville Ave, Washington Street corridor. Definitely the oldest on Somerville Ave. This probably dates to around 1791, built for a farmer named George Ireland. And you can see the federal qualities of this house, the four bays on the side here. If you go around to the side, you will see some brick that has some Flemish bond detail. If you look on either side of the front door here, you will see pilasters that have late Georgian proportions rather than the more slender federal proportions. If we were to get inside and go into the basement, we would see an amazing, hefty brick arched structure that holds up the chimney, that holds up the fireplace. You'll see chair rails inside.
Not anymore.
Oh God, don't tell me.
They have flooded the entire building. There is nothing left.
This is a very sad story. And it was the third owner. The second owner was Patrick Tracy Jackson, who was one of the founders of Lowell. And he had an enormous real estate portfolio. This was just one of hundreds of properties that Patrick Tracy Jackson owned. And apparently it was his idea that the people who worked in industry along here would rent rooms in here, and that's apparently what happened. And then around 1846 or so, Osgood Dane comes into the story, hence the name Dane Street. And there's also an Osgood Street around here somewhere. And Osgood Dane had a stone quarrying business. And Christy, refresh my memory.
The quarry is, you go straight to the end of the street, you'll hit Granite Street, and it's on the right. You'll see the whole back is a granite quarry wall behind all the houses.
Because slate was fairly prevalent in Somerville, but not so much with granite. And he had a granite quarry in the back there, and then the Dane family owned it until the early 1900s. So anyway, so it's sounding like end of interesting details inside story. There was a Victorian era stair rail and newel post, and I suppose that's gone. The Irelands could have looked out their front windows here and would have seen the farmers going to market in Charlestown and Boston and on their way back into Middlesex County.
And the brother had the house down on Washington Street next to Buddy's.
Buddy's Truck Stop Diner.
It's next door.
There's next door to that is a 1780s Ireland family house.
Yep.
So
the Board of Aldermen didn't really want to agree to designation for any building that the owners didn't agree to have it designated. And the current owners of this property didn't want it designated. I can't remember there was some personal story that I can't remember. Alzheimer's, somebody had Alzheimer's, they were taking care of this elderly relative, and so everybody felt sorry for the owners, and so it wasn't designated. It's been sold twice since then, and we have no control about what's going to happen to it because it's not designated. And it's one of the oldest buildings in the city. So
They knock it down if they want to.
they could knock it down if they want to. They could just tear it to the ground. We would be able to delay the demolition for 9 months, and that's it. And after 9 months, they could knock it down. So
I don't think they're going to do that for the type of work they're doing, but
no, yeah. So if anybody ever has any second thoughts about having their house designated, you never know what's going to happen after you. You never know what turns life is going to bring, and you may think that you're giving up some freedom and control of your own property, but sometimes I feel that when you have an older house, a significant house, or something that has architectural or historic value, you're really just the stewards of it, and it's really, you have a responsibility to pass it on to future generations in Somerville. So that's why I'm in favor of designation.
well said. Okay. We're in Garrier Square, and the Garrier name comes from two local Somerville brothers who sadly died in the First World War. And so this is an amazing intersection in terms of architectural design. Across the street in front of us is the Drouet or Drouet block of the 1890s. And this was designed by Aaron Gould, who was originally from Nova Scotia, started out as a carpenter, came down here to Somerville, and designed the Richmond, which is further down Bow around the corner here. I think it's on Bow and Wesley. And then he may have designed over here where the Well Foods is. That is the Bennett block of the 1890s. So he very probably designed the Bennett block as well. And you know, the Druette block is just bristles with these wonderful Renaissance revival window surrounds, the deep cornices, just a handsome building, lots of paneled pilasters, and over the storefronts are these entablatures that have dental courses and the molded cornices, and it's just it's the type of building that usually doesn't survive, and I think we're all delighted that it has. And then over across the street here, this brick building with the mesh screen from the 1950s. This is the old Star Theater, which let me see, I think it's 1911. Is that right, Christy? Something like that. And it's considered to be the second theater in America that was purpose-built for moving pictures, motion pictures. In other words, this was not a vaudeville theater the way many of the movie palaces were. This was built to show movies in, when they were silent movies. So this has a big, big place in the history of American cinema. And, you know, there it sits, partially obscured by this mesh screen. But above, you can see this wonderful corbelled cornice. Corbelling meaning the stepped out brickwork detail. So maybe the renaissance of that building should continue and the screen should be removed. And then the Bennett block over here, which was built in the early to mid 1890s. And this was built for a man named Carlton, who had a heating and plumbing concern in the back L of the building. And this, on the upper floors, there were Irish and Italian immigrants primarily at the turn of the 20th century. And you've got these great segmental and bowed oriels that project from the walls, and then these very peculiar kind of A-shaped gables without roofs that, Christy, was there ever a photo that... So there probably wasn't a gable roof that went behind those?
No, I don't think so. I think it may have had a witch's cap on the
Corner? Yeah. Okay, and then you see the second floor windows have some fancy raised swag detail with a little bellflowers. Very handsome commercial residential block. And then this early gas station over here that says air conditioning service on it. That's from the 19-teens. And that's a reminder that Somerville plays an important role in early automobile history in this country, that there were a number of very early commercial garages, early residential garages, early auto body shops. Union Square and vicinity has a lot of that. So I think on that note, this little gas station is sort of like the period at the end of a very long sentence that we will now adjourn to Machu Picchu for complimentary refreshments. So thank you all for being on this tour. Great to see you all.
Thank you. Wonderful, and thank you so much.
Thank you.